"Do you even know what you're doing to me right now?" Mrs. Chen whispered, her fingers still intertwined with mine. "Hello, I'm Sammy. I'm 26, a photographer trying to make it in the city. And I've always been the guy who notices things others miss. The quiet moments, the way light changes everything. The spaces between words where truth lives. I grew up just outside Portland, nothing special, middle child of 3. Spent most of college behind a camera, which is how I met David. He needed headshots for consulting interviews. I needed rent money. 7 years later, he's my best friend. The one who asked me to house sit while his parents traveled. Simple favor. Easy week, until his mom came home early. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Margaret Chen, 47. Brilliant surgeon, married 24 years to a man always in Singapore or Tokyo or somewhere that wasn't here. And now she was looking at me like I was the answer to a question she hadn't meant to ask. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I slipped my key into the Chen's front door lock that Monday afternoon, the familiar weight of my overnight bag on my shoulder. David had texted detailed instructions, but I'd been here enough times over the years to know my way around. The house still held that same warmth it had back in Kalaja, blend of leather-bound books, fresh flowers, and something uniquely comfortable I could never quite name. The guest room waited for me exactly as I remembered. Cream walls, navy bedding, and a view of the Japanese maple in the backyard. I set my bag down, thinking how many times I'd crashed here during college breaks when going home wasn't an option. Mrs. Chen had always made sure there were fresh towels, extra blankets, and somehow, though I never told her my favorite kind of tea in the kitchen cabinet. Standing in that room now, at 24. Memories flickered like old photographs. Mrs. Chen appearing at our dorm during finals week, armed with containers of her homemade dumplings. Her quiet pride at our graduation, insisting on photos with both David and me. Her silk dress catching the May sunshine. She'd always been David's mom, of course, but there was something about her that stayed with me the way she'd remember. Small details about my life, or how her eyes crinkled when she really smiled. I unpacked slowly. Hanging shirts in the closet that still held the cedar blocks she swore by. 7 days of house-sitting stretched ahead while Mr. Chen attended business meetings in Singapore, and Mrs. Chen visited her sister in Vancouver. David had apologized for volunteering me, but I didn't mind. The quiet would be good for working. On my photography portfolio, once settled, I wandered the familiar halls. Family photos lined the walls David through the years. His parents in younger days, moments I recognized, and others from before I knew them. The house felt different, empty, like a theater between shows, full of echoes and possibility. I found myself drawn to Mrs. Chen's study, a room I'd glimpsed but rarely entered. Afternoon light slanted through gauzy curtains, illuminating floor tusseling, bookshelves. Medical journals shared space with well-worn novels, speaking to both her profession and her passion for stories. A reading chair sat angled toward the window, a soft throw draped over one arm. My fingers trailed along book spines until one caught my attention. The Healing Lens, Photography as Therapy. I pulled it carefully from its spot, drawn to the intersection of my interests and hers. The book's pages were annotated in her neat handwriting, little insights and questions in the margins. I decided to borrow it for my evening reading, imagining conversations we might have about it when they returned. The first few days passed quietly. I worked remotely during the day, took walks at sunset, and spent evenings reading either in the living room or out on the back deck. Thursday night found me curled in the oversized armchair, lost in the photography book's chapters about capturing human emotion. The house creaked occasionally, settling into the night's coolness. My phone showed 10:30 when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of keys in the front door lock. I froze. Heart suddenly loud in my ears. David had been clear. His dad wouldn't be back until next Wednesday. His mom the following weekend. The deadbolt turned with a heavy click. Streetlights spilled through the front windows, creating long shadows across the hardwood floor. I set the book down silently, every sense alert. The door opened and a familiar silhouette stepped inside Mrs. Chen, rolling a small suitcase. She didn't see me at first, occupied with slipping off her shoes in the entryway. Double quotes, Mrs. Chen. I kept my voice soft, not wanting to startle her. She jumped slightly anyway, one hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Sammy." The overhead light clicked on, revealing her surprised expression. She wore traveling clothes, dark pants, a soft sweater, her dark hair slightly tousled from what I assumed was a long flight. "I'm so sorry, did David not tell you I was coming back early?" I shook my head, still processing her unexpected appearance. "No, he didn't mention it." The book sat abandoned on the chair's arm, her marginalia now feeling strangely intimate. "My sister had a work emergency," she explained, wheeling her suitcase inside. "I caught an earlier flight rather than staying alone." A pause, then, "I hope I didn't frighten you. I took a conference in Seattle instead," Mrs. Chen explained, her medical conference badge still hanging from her neck. The plastic caught the light as she stepped fully into the entryway. "But they canceled the whole thing last minute due to some venue emergency. Most of us just decided to head home rather than wait around." I was already setting the book aside, moving to gather my things. "Let me get out of your way. Can pack up pretty quickly." "Don't be silly," she waved off my offer, bending to remove her heels with a small sigh of relief. "The house is plenty big enough for both of us. And honestly, I'm glad not to come home to an empty house after all this travel chaos." That's when she noticed the book I'd borrowed, still sitting on the armchair. Her eyes lingered on the cover, and something shifted in her expressions, something I couldn't quite read. "You found my photography and medicine book," she said softly. "Hope you don't mind," I replied, suddenly unsure if I'd overstepped by taking it from her study. The intersection of art and healing it caught my attention. "No, I don't mind at all." She smiled, but there was something careful in it. "Would you like some tea? I could use something warm after that flight." I followed her to the kitchen, watching as she moved through familiar motions, kettle filled, cups retrieved, tea bags selected with practiced care. The overhead light felt too bright after the dim living room, making everything stark and a little surreal. Here I was, having midnight tea with my best friend's mother, both of us slightly rumpled from interrupted evenings. "How's the job search going?" she asked, leaning against the counter while we waited for the water to boil. "David mentioned you're between apartments." "Yeah, my lease is up next month. I'm doing some freelance photography while looking for something more stable." The kettle clicked off, and I watched steam curl up toward the cabinets. The timing worked out well with house-sitting, actually. She nodded, pouring water into our cups. "And the book, is it helpful?" I found it fascinating how they used photography to help patients process trauma and chronic illness. "I've only read a few chapters, but yes, your notes in the margins add another layer entirely." I accepted the cup she offered, wrapping my hands around its warmth. "I never considered using my photography that way." Mrs. Chen took a slow sip of her tea, eyes closing briefly. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background. "'Kay, I'm completely exhausted," she admitted, finally. "Travel days are always draining, but this one?" She shook her head. "Let me help with your suitcase," I offered, setting down my cup. "You should get some rest." She didn't protest as I followed her upstairs, rolling her small suitcase behind me. The second floor was dark, except for moonlight through the windows, casting everything in gentle blues and grays. At her bedroom door, she paused, turning to face me. "Thank you, Sammy. not just for the suitcase, for taking care of the house. Her voice was soft in the darkness. I'm glad someone was here when I came back. Something about the way she said. It made my chest tighten slightly. There was a weight to her words I couldn't quite grasp, like a conversation happening just below the surface of our actual one. I managed to quiet, of course, before heading to the guest room, my mind spinning, with questions I hadn't known I needed to ask. I woke early Friday morning, sunlight already streaming through the guest room windows. After the unexpected late-night encounter, it felt right to pack up and give Mrs. Chen her space back. I gathered my laptop and camera gear first, trying to move quietly through the upstairs hallway. But when I reached the kitchen, she was already there in a casual sweater and slacks. Measuring coffee grounds into the filter. 2 mugs sat ready on the counter. Going somewhere? She asked without turning around, somehow sensing my frozen stance in the doorway. I thought it would be better if Sammy. She faced me then, coffee scoop paused mid-air. You promised David you'd watch the house through Sunday. The fact that I'm here doesn't change that arrangement. She resumed, measuring with precise movements. Besides, where would you go? You mentioned your new apartment isn't ready yet. The rich scent of brewing coffee filled the kitchen as I shifted my laptop bag on my shoulder. I could stay with. The house has plenty of space. She interrupted again, softer this time. And I'm hardly here during the day with all my patient calls. She pulled a carton of cream from the fridge. How do you take your coffee? Something in her matter-of-fact tone made resistance feel foolish. I set my bag down. Just cream. Thanks. She nodded, preparing both cups with practiced efficiency. I'll be in my study most of the morning. The kitchen table has good light if you need to work. And somehow, just like that, we fell into an unexpected rhythm. I set up my laptop and external hard drive, sorting through recent engagement photos I needed to edit. Every so often, I'd hear her voice drift down the hallway, gentle but professional, as she spoke with patients about treatment plans and recovery timelines. Around 10 o'clock, she appeared in the kitchen for a coffee refill. Those colors are beautiful, she commented, glancing at my screen where I was adjusting the sunset tones in a couple's portrait. You capture light differently than most photographers I've seen. Thanks, I said, surprised by her specific observation. I try to find unusual angles, especially during golden hour. She leaned closer, one hand braced on the back of my chair. Is that why you waited for the sun to hit that exact spot? The way it creates a halo effect. The warmth of her presence behind me made it slightly harder to focus on the screen. Yeah, exactly. Though sometimes you just get lucky with timing. Throughout the morning, she'd emerge between calls, asking thoughtful questions about technique or sharing observations about particular images. Her genuine interest made me more talkative than usual, explaining the stories behind certain shots or discussing the challenges of freelance work. When lunchtime arrived, she assembled sandwiches with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown with coffee. The patio's nice this time of day, she suggested. Already heading for the French doors with plates in hand. The afternoon air was warm, but not uncomfortable, filtered through the shade of an old maple tree. We sat at the wrought iron table, and conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected. She told me about her private practice, the rewards and difficulties of working with long-term patients. I shared my hopes of opening my own studio someday. The garden looks amazing, I commented, noticing the carefully tended flowers along the fence line. Thank you, though that back gate's been giving me trouble for months. She gestured toward the wooden gate separating the patio from the side yard. It sticks every time I try to bring garden supplies through. Robert kept saying he'd fix it, but... She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. I could take a look at it, I offered. Might just need the hinges adjusted. The smile she gave me then was different from her earlier ones, warmer. Somehow, with a hint of something that made my chest tighten slightly. For the first time since arriving, I found myself seeing past the label of David's mom to the woman herself. Intelligent, accomplished, and unexpectedly engaging. "That would be wonderful," she said, still holding my gaze. "Though not right now. Why, it's supposed to rain this afternoon." She gathered our empty plates. "Maybe tomorrow, when the weather's better." I nodded, following her back inside, acutely aware that something had shifted during lunch. The question was whether I was ready to acknowledge exactly what that shift might mean. The afternoon sun beat down as I inspected the garden gate, testing its swing. The wood caught halfway, scraping against the path with a sound that made me wince. No wonder Mrs. Chen had been frustrated with it. I retrieved my basic toolkit from the car and set to work, first checking the hinges for rust or misalignment. 20 minutes in, sweat dampening my t-shirt. I heard footsteps on the patio behind me. Mrs. Chen appeared, holding a glass of ice water and a bright red apple. "I thought you might need refreshments," she said, setting them on the nearby garden table. "How's it going?" I wiped my hands on my jeans before accepting the water. "Thanks. The bottom hinge is completely loose, and the wood's warped a bit from moisture. But I think I can get it working smoothly again." Instead of heading back inside, she settled into one of the patio chairs, watching as I returned to the gate. "I was supposed to be presenting right now, actually," she said after a moment, more to herself than to me. At the conference, I paused, screwdriver in hand. "What was your presentation about?" Her whole demeanor shifted as she began explaining, something lit up in her expression. "I've been developing some modifications to traditional surgical techniques for complex hand injuries. Ways to preserve more nerve function and flexibility during reconstruction." She leaned forward in her chair, hands moving expressively as she spoke. "You see, the conventional approach often sacrifices certain nerve pathways to stabilize the major structures. But I've found that by approaching from a different angle," she demonstrated with her fingers, tracing invisible surgical paths in the air, "we can often save those secondary networks. It makes a huge difference in recovery, especially for artists, musicians, anyone who needs fine motor control." I found myself completely drawn in by her enthusiasm. The technical terms somehow made accessible by her clear passion for the work. "How long did it take you to develop these techniques?" "Almost 20 years of refinement," she said, eyes bright with remembered discoveries. "Each case taught me something new. I remember this violinist. About 10 years ago, her hand was crushed in a car accident. The standard procedure would have left her with basic function, but no real dexterity. But by that point, I'd started experimenting with alternative approaches." She continued sharing stories of breakthrough moments and challenging cases, making complex medical concepts feel like mysteries being unraveled. I asked genuine questions, fascinated by both the subject matter and the way she came alive while discussing it. "I'm sorry your presentation got canceled," I said, testing the gate's swing after tightening the final screws. "It sounds like important research to share." She sighed, some of the animation fading. "Yes, well, there will be other conferences. It's just, I've been working on this presentation for months, perfecting the slides, practicing the delivery. It feels anticlimactic to pack it all away unused." I worked the gate back and forth, satisfied with its smooth movement. "Maybe you could record it? Create a video presentation to share with colleagues. That's actually not a bad idea." She stood up, approaching to inspect my handiwork. I hadn't considered that option. The gate swung easily under her touch, and she smiled. "This is perfect. Thank you." Her hand touched my arm in appreciation, lingering just a moment longer than casual gratitude required. That brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. "Since we're both here," she said, withdrawing her hand but maintaining eye contact, "would you like to help me cook dinner? I was thinking of making pasta, and I have a nice bottle of wine if you drink." Something in her tone made the invitation feel weighted with possibility, though I might have been imagining it. The late afternoon sun caught the silver strands in her dark hair, and I found myself noticing how the light brought out warm undertones in her eyes. "That sounds great," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "I'd like that." She nodded, pleased. "Let me just change into something more comfortable first. Cooking in work clothes never ends well." With another smile, she turned toward the house, leaving me to gather my tools and wonder exactly what I was getting myself into. Steam rose from the pot of boiling water, fogging the kitchen window as evening settled outside. Mrs. Chen had changed into soft black pants and a cream sweater that caught the warm light from above the stove. I stood at the cutting board, focusing maybe too intently on the vegetables before me. "Red or white?" she asked, reaching into a cabinet that held an impressive wine collection. "Red's good," I said, watching as she selected a bottle and worked the corkscrew with practiced ease. The rich scent of the wine filled the space between us as she poured 2 generous glasses. "David used to help me cook sometimes," she said, handing me one. Though his idea of helping usually meant stealing bits of whatever I was making, our smile held warmth and something wistful. "He once ate half the chocolate chips meant for cookies before I noticed." I laughed, picturing teenage David's sweet tooth. "That sounds like him." "He still keeps emergency candy bars in his desk at work." Moving around each other in the kitchen created a strange dance of awareness. Each time she passed behind me to reach the spice rack or drawer, I felt the air shift. The space felt smaller somehow, more intimate with just the two of us. "The photography going?" she asked, adding pasta to the boiling water. "David mentioned you've been doing more artistic work lately, not just events. It's single quotes as ... getting there." I set down my knife, turning to face her. "I love shooting weddings, but there's something different about creating purely for yourself, you know? Following your own vision instead of someone else's expectations." She nodded, stirring the pasta. "I understand that feeling. Even with all my research breakthroughs, most days still follow the same patterns. Consultations, procedures, paperwork. Sometimes I wonder if I've let myself get too comfortable with routine." We reached for the wooden spoon on the counter at the same time, our hands brushing. Instead of immediately pulling away, we both hesitated, the contact lingering for one charged moment before she withdrew, color rising in her cheeks. I noticed then that her left hand was bare. She'd removed her wedding ring to cook and hadn't put it back on. Dinner came together in a comfortable rhythm of shared tasks and half-finished conversations. The pasta was perfect, the wine loosening. Something in both of us as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. "I haven't told David I'm back," she said suddenly, swirling the wine in her glass. The admission settled between us like a weight. "Why not?" I asked, watching her expression carefully. She met my eyes directly, something vulnerable in her gaze. "I'm not sure," she said softly. The kitchen felt very quiet then. The only sound, the gentle hum of the dishwasher we'd loaded earlier. After we finished eating, she stood with unusual quickness, gathering plates. "We could watch something if you'd like," she suggested. But her tone was different now, more guarded, almost formal. Before I could respond, she shook her head. "Actually, I should probably get some rest. It's been a long day." "Of course," I said, standing as well. "Thank you for dinner." "Good night," she said, her formality feeling like a door closing. She turned away quickly, leaving me alone in the kitchen with 2 empty wine glasses and questions I wasn't sure I should be asking. I watched her disappear up the stairs, remembering the moment our hands had touched, the way she'd looked at me. When admitting she hadn't told David about her early return, something was shifting between us, subtle but undeniable. Like shadows lengthening at dusk, Saturday morning arrived with a steady drumbeat of rain against the windows. I'd settled into the living room with my laptop, editing photos from a recent wedding, when Mrs. Chen appeared with her morning coffee. She glanced up at the ceiling, where water pattered against the skylights. "The study's impossible on days like this," she said, settling onto the couch with her own laptop. The rain echoes off the glass. "Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the open space. "It's your house." We worked in companionable silence for a while, the rain creating a cozy barrier between us and the outside world. I caught myself stealing glances at her as she frowned at her screen, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She dressed casually in dark jeans and an oversized sweater, her feet tucked under her on the couch. After about an hour, she closed her laptop with a sigh. "Can I ask you something?" I looked up from my editing. "Of course. I know the conference was canceled, but I've put so much work into this presentation." She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a gesture I'd never seen from her before. "Would you mind? I mean, I could use some feedback on the clarity and pacing." Fresh eyes. "I'd be happy to listen," I said, setting aside my work. "Though I should warn you, my knowledge of surgical techniques is pretty limited." She smiled. "That might actually be helpful. Come up to the study. The diagrams will make more sense there." I followed her upstairs, noticing how the rain seemed louder here, drumming against the skylight. The study walls were covered in detailed medical diagrams, cross-sections of organs, surgical approaches, healing progressions. Her laptop connected to a small projector, casting her first slide onto the wall. She began confidently enough, clicking through her introduction with practiced ease. But something shifted as she moved into the technical portion. She stumbled over terms I was sure she knew by heart. Started and restarted sentences, growing more flustered with each slide. Finally, she laughed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so scattered today. Try something different," I suggested, leaning against her desk. "Instead of imagining a conference hall, just explain it to me, like we're having a conversation." She took a deep breath, nodding. "Okay, let me try that." The change was immediate. She moved closer to point out details on her laptop screen, her voice finding its natural rhythm. Her passion for the work shone through as she described innovative techniques she'd developed, making complex procedures accessible through careful explanation. I found myself drawn in by her enthusiasm, asking questions that made her eyes light up. She'd step closer to highlight specific details, and each time she did, I caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something elegant and expensive that made it hard to focus on the medical terminology she was describing. When she paused between sections, she glanced at me apologetically. "I must be boring you to death with all this technical detail." "I've never been less bored," I said honestly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. She turned from the screen then, studying my face carefully. The rain fell harder against the skylight, filling the silence between us. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or realization. Her eyes held mine for a long moment before she looked away, but not before I saw something there that made my heart beat faster. Should I continue? She asked softly, still not looking at me. "Please," I said, equally quiet. She nodded and turned back to her presentation. But everything felt different now, charged with awareness. Each time she stepped closer to indicate something on the screen, the space between us seemed to crackle with unspoken possibility. Her voice had taken on a different quality too, lower and more intimate. As if she were sharing secrets instead of surgical techniques. The rain continued its steady rhythm above us, turning the study into our own private world where professional boundaries seemed to blur with each passing slide. The medical discussion gradually wound down, her presentation forgotten as we drifted into more personal territory. Mrs. Chen turned away from her laptop, settling back against her desk. "What about your work?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "David mentioned you had an exhibition recently." "It's just a small gallery showing," I said, trying to downplay it. Urban Photography Series. I'd love to see it, she said, leaning forward slightly. If you're willing to share. I hesitated only briefly before pulling out my phone. They're just preliminary selects, but ... Please, she said, gesturing to the small leather couch beneath the window. Show me. I sat down, and to my surprise, she moved from her desk chair to join me. The couch wasn't particularly large, meant more for reading than entertaining, and her thigh came to rest mere inches from mine. She held out her hand for my phone, and I found myself noticing how elegant her fingers looked as she took it. These are from my series about transient moments in the city, I explained as she began scrolling, trying to capture those fleeting instances of connection or disconnection in urban spaces. She moved through the images slowly, thoughtfully. Unlike most people who typically rushed through photos with cursory comments, she took time with each one. Her questions were specific, insightful about composition choices, about the interplay of light and shadow, about the stories suggested in each frame. This angle here, she said, pointing to a shot of early morning commuters reflected in office building windows, the way you've layered the reflections. It makes everyone look like they're existing in multiple planes at once, like parallel lives. I found myself leaning closer, drawn in by her understanding. That's exactly what I was trying to capture. How we all move through these shared spaces, but remain in our own separate worlds. She nodded, continuing to scroll until she stopped abruptly at one particular image. It showed a woman's reflection. In a rain-streaked window, her face partially obscured by droplets that caught the glow of streetlights. The woman was looking down at her phone, but her reflection seemed to be gazing out into the night. Mrs. Chen lifted her hand, tracing the path of the rain drops in the air just above the screen, careful not to touch it. This one, ... she said. Softly, you've captured something profound here. What do you see? I asked, genuinely curious about her interpretation. You see loneliness and beauty simultaneously, she said, still studying the image. The rain creates this barrier between her and the world, but it also transforms everything into something almost magical. She's isolated, but there's something luminous about it. She looked up then, perhaps to gauge my reaction to her analysis, and seemed startled to find our faces mere inches apart. I hadn't realized how close we'd gotten while looking at the photos together. The air between us changed instantly, becoming dense with unspoken possibility. I could see the subtle flecks of gold in her brown eyes, notice the slight unevenness. In her breathing, she didn't move away. Neither did I. Time seemed to slow down, marked only by our careful breaths and the continuing rhythm of rain against the skylight. The space between us felt charged, alive with potential energy. I could smell her perfume more clearly now. Something with notes of vanilla and amber, and see the slight flush rising in her cheeks. We sat there, suspended in that moment of almost every small movement, the slight parting of her lips. The way her gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before meeting my eyes again felt magnified in significance. The phone in her hand was forgotten, the screen gone dark. But neither of us moved to break this delicate new equilibrium. It was like my own photography. Come to life, a transient moment caught between what was and what could be, beauty and loneliness tangled together in the shrinking space between us. The rain continued its steady pattern overhead, cocooning us in this private moment where everything familiar had suddenly become new and uncertain. We shouldn't, Mrs. Chen whispered, but her hand found mine on the leather cushion between us. Her touch hesitant but deliberate. The phone slid forgotten onto her lap. I know, I said softly, turning my palm up to meet hers. Our fingers interlaced naturally, like they'd been designed to fit together. The simple contact sent electricity through my entire body. She stared at our joined hands with the same focused intensity I'd seen her give complex medical diagrams. as if trying to decode some vital truth hidden in the way our fingers wrapped together when she finally looked back up at my face. Her eyes held a mix of vulnerability and determination that made my heart skip. The first kiss happened in slow motion. She leaned toward me with infinite patience, closing the distance between us by millimeters. Each tiny movement was measured, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to pretend this wasn't happening. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing until her lips finally met mine. The contact was feather-light at first, tentative and questioning. Her lips were impossibly soft, carrying the lingering taste of the morning's coffee. That gentle press contained whole worlds of meaning, crossing lines, breaking rules, choosing something we couldn't unchoose. I let her set the pace, matching her careful exploration as the kiss deepened slightly. Both of us testing this new reality. When we separated, she kept her face close to mine. Her free hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb tracing along my cheekbone. With such tenderness, it made my chest ache. The simple intimacy of that touch felt almost more significant than the kiss itself. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question carried layers of meaning about age, about consequences, about her son, who was my friend. About all the complications we were inviting into our lives. "Do you?" I countered softly, holding her gaze. She considered this seriously, weighing all the implications with the same careful attention she gave everything else. Instead of answering with words, she leaned in again, this time with notably more certainty. The second kiss was deeper, longer, more assured. Her hand slid from my cheek into my hair, drawing me closer as her mouth moved against mine with growing confidence. I could feel her wedding ring now back on her finger, cool against my neck, a reminder of all the barriers we were choosing to ignore. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing unevenly. Her lipstick was slightly smudged. Her pupils dilated, and I knew I probably looked equally affected. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the skylight, creating a private atmosphere that made everything feel simultaneously more real and more dreamlike. She studied my face for a long moment, her expression both tender and troubled. Then, she asked the question that would change everything: the guest room or mine? The weight of those 4 words hung in the air between us like a door we were about to walk through. It wasn't just about choosing a location. It was about choosing to fully cross this line, to transform our relationship into something irreversible. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around mine as we sat there, suspended in that moment of decision. I looked at our still joined hands, then back to her face. Everything about this situation was complicated. Her marriage, my friendship with David, the significant age gap between us. Yet, in that moment, the attraction and connection felt like the simplest truth I'd ever known. The rain tapped steadily above us, marking time as we sat on the precipice of this choice. Her question remained unanswered between us, full of possibility and consequence. The study felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as if the world had narrowed down to just this room, this moment, this impossible decision we were about to make. "Mine?" I said quietly, watching the effect of that single word transform her expression. Something crystallized in her eyes: hesitation giving way to certainty, desire overcoming doubt. She stood from the study couch with fluid grace, her hand still holding mine, and I rose to follow. The house felt different as she led me from the study, each step deliberate and weighted with meaning. The familiar hallway took on new significance, everyday objects suddenly charged with intimate possibility. Her fingers were warm against mine, our joined hands, a compass pointing us toward something irreversible at the base of the stairs. She paused and turned back to face me. The afternoon light, filtering through rain-streaked windows, caught the silver threads in her dark hair, highlighting the elegant curve of her neck. Her eyes searched mine, giving me one last chance to step back from this precipice. I squeezed her hand gently in response, a wordless confirmation of my choice. We climbed slowly, each step an acknowledgement of the boundary we were choosing to cross. The wooden stairs creaked softly beneath us, marking our ascent like a quiet drumbeat. I'd been up and down these stairs countless times over the years, but never like this, never with such acute awareness of every movement, every breath. The upstairs hallway stretched before us, somehow longer than I remembered. Family photos lined the walls, David's graduation, vacation snapshots, moments from a life I knew from the outside looking in. Now those captured smiles seemed to watch our passage, silent witnesses to this transformation of relationships. Noticed she didn't look at them as we passed, her gaze fixed forward with quiet determination. When we reached her bedroom door, she stopped again. Her hand rested on the doorknob, but didn't turn it. In profile, I could see her pulse flutter at her throat, matching the rapid beat of my own heart. The air felt thick with anticipation and the weight of consequences. "After this, everything changes," she said softly. It wasn't a question, but a recognition of truth, a line being drawn between before and after. The simple statement carried layers of meaning about friendship, family, and the comfortable patterns we were about to disrupt. "I know," I replied, my voice steady despite the electricity humming through my veins. "David," she began, but I reached up to gently touch her lips, stopping the words before they could fully form. Her skin was soft beneath my fingertips, and I felt her breath catch at the contact. "Is my best friend," I finished for her, "keeping my touch feather light, and this is separate from that. This is just us." She turned to face me fully then, studying my expression with the same careful attention she gave everything else in her life. I let her look, keeping my gaze open and honest as she searched for any trace of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she drew in a slow breath and turned the doorknob. The door opened with a quiet click, revealing the intimate space of her bedroom. Afternoon rain still drummed steadily against the windows, creating a cocoon of privacy around this moment of choice. She stepped across the threshold first, drawing me after her with our still joined hands. And the door closed behind us with a soft finality. The scent of lavender drifted from somewhere, perhaps her sheets, or a diffuser by the window left cracked to welcome the afternoon rain. The familiar fragrance mixed with petrichor, creating something new and intimate in the filtered gray light. Mrs. Chen turned to face me, and I saw a flicker of vulnerability cross her features despite this being her own bedroom, her own sanctuary. She stood perfectly still, watching me with those dark, intelligent eyes that had followed my movements all week. The confident surgeon from the study presentation was gone, replaced by someone softer, questioning. I stepped closer, moving slowly to cup her face in my hands. My thumb traced the delicate arch of her cheekbone, offering one final moment to reconsider, to step back from this precipice we'd been approaching since that first night she returned early. Instead of retreating, she leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. When they opened again, something had shifted. Her hands found the hem of my shirt, sliding underneath to rest against my skin. The contact sent electricity through my nerve endings, but I held still, letting her explore this new territory at her own pace. Her palms were warm and certain against my stomach, my ribs. Learning the topography of my body with the same focus she brought to everything else, we moved together toward her bed, each step measured and deliberate. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. In the muted afternoon light, we stopped to truly see each other not as David's mother and his friend, but as to people choosing this moment, this connection. Her fingers found my shirt buttons, working them free one by one. Each new inch of skin revealed seemed to fascinate her, and she traced patterns I couldn't decode across my chest. I reached for the zipper of her dress, pausing with my hand on the metal pull. "Yes," she whispered, answering my unspoken question. The zipper's quiet descent felt momentous in the rain-wrapped quiet of her room. Between kisses that grew deeper and more certain, we exchanged whispered confirmations. "Are you sure?" I breathed against her neck. "Please," she responded, fingers threading through my hair. Each word was a stepping stone across the river of doubt, leading us to solid ground on the other side. The door closed with a soft click that felt like a promise of discretion, of intention, of choosing each other, despite complications. Outside, the rain fell harder against the windows, wrapping us in a cocoon of white noise and intimacy as afternoon began its slow fade toward evening. In this moment, the world beyond her bedroom ceased to exist. There was only us, the rain, and the certain knowledge that everything had changed. Mrs. Chunno. I corrected myself silently. In this moment, she was just Grace pulled back slightly to meet my eyes. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by something warm and knowing. She reached up to trace my lower lip with her thumb, and I kissed it softly, making her smile in a way I'd never seen before. The rain kept falling, marking time in its own liquid language as we stood wrapped in this moment of mutual choice. The gray light painted everything in soft focus, like one of my photographs where edges blur into suggestion rather than sharp reality. But this was real, her warm skin under my hands, the sound of our mingled breathing, the way the air seemed to hold us in perfect suspension between what was and what would be. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, and she pressed closer, as if the sound had dissolved the last thread of hesitation. The lavender scent surrounded us, familiar and new all at once, just like everything else about this afternoon. Time seemed to slow, stretch, create space for us to exist in this parallel world where normal rules and relationships didn't apply. The rain-cooled air from the window raised goosebumps later. Much later, we lay tangled in sheets while rain painted silvery trails down her windows. Grace's head rested on my chest, her breath warm and steady against my skin. My fingers wove gently through her hair, soft and loose from where it had fallen from its usual neat style. Neither of us spoke for what felt like hours, letting the weight of what we'd done settle around us like a heavy blanket. The rain provided a gentle soundtrack to our thoughts, marking time in liquid percussion against glass. Grace's fingertips traced abstract patterns across my chest circles, lines, shapes I couldn't decode but wanted to memorize. I found myself studying the elegant curve of her shoulder, the way shadow and scattered light played across her skin, trying to capture this moment with a photographer's eye. "Do you regret it?" she finally whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain. The question held no accusation, just genuine curiosity tinged with vulnerability. I considered her words carefully, knowing the answer mattered more than most I'd given in my life. "No," I said, running my fingers along her spine. "I could never regret this, not any part of it." She lifted her head slightly to look at me, searching my face for truth. Whatever she found there made her smile a soft, private expression I'd never seen before tonight. "I've thought about you differently for a while now," she admitted, settling back against my chest. "Since last Christmas, when David brought you to family dinner." The confession surprised us both, hanging in the air between heartbeats. "Really?" I asked, remembering that evening's string lights, holiday music, good wine. A coup helped with dishes without being asked. She continued, her voice taking on a reflective quality. "But more than that, you asked about my work, about the research I was doing. You treated me like ... like a person. Not just David's mother or someone's wife. You actually saw me." I remembered that conversation by the sink, steam rising from hot water, her enthusiasm about a new surgical technique she was developing. "You're impossible not to see," I said softly. meaning every word. The night deepened around us as we talked, sharing thoughts and stories that had lived too long in silence. She told me about her first surgery, her hands shaking so badly she'd nearly dropped the scalpel. I described the moment I knew photography was more than just a hobby, capturing a stranger's joy through a lens and feeling like I'd witnessed something sacred. Hours passed like water through our fingers. Grace spoke about her fears of growing invisible with age, while I confessed my uncertainty about building a career from art. Each revelation felt like unwrapping a gift, discovering new layers of each other beyond the physical connection we'd shared. The rain softened to mist as false dawn began to lighten the windows. Exhaustion finally found us, weighing down our eyelids and slowing our words. Grace's breathing grew deeper, more rhythmic, against my chest. I pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in lavender and contentment. Before sleep claimed me too, the first thing I noticed was sunlight, bright and unexpected after yesterday's endless rain. Then came the rich aroma of coffee, pulling me fully awake. Grace stood by the bedroom window in my wrinkled button-down shirt, holding 2 steaming mugs, her silhouette haloed by morning light. She'd left most of the buttons undone, the shirt falling to mid-thigh, and her hair tumbled loose around her shoulders. "Good morning," she said softly, crossing to my side of the bed. She handed me one of the mugs, and when I took my first sip, I realized she prepared it perfectly, just the right amount of cream, no sugar. The fact that she'd noticed my coffee preference without asking made something warm unfold in my chest. "We're paying attention," I said, nodding to the mug. She smiled, settling beside me on the bed. "I notice things. It's part of being a surgeon, Dale's matter." We sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching sunlight play across the garden through her window. Everything looked washed clean, sparkling with leftover raindrops. The gate I'd fixed swung gently in the morning breeze, moving freely on its newly oiled hinges. Something about that simple motion, the ease of it, the quiet usefulness seemed to represent everything that had changed between us. Grace took another sip of her coffee, then set it carefully on the nightstand next to mine. 2 mugs where there had always been one, a small, still life that somehow contained our entire story. Temporary, perhaps, but absolutely real in this moment. "David comes back Tuesday," she said after a while, not looking at me directly. The words carried no judgment or regret, just a gentle acknowledgement of time passing. We both understood what she meant. This bubble we'd created had an expiration date. She turned to face me then, one hand coming up to trace my jaw. "No regrets?" she asked again, an echo of last night's question. I caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "None," I said firmly, meaning it more than ever in the clear light of morning. "This isn't something I'll ever regret." She nodded, something settling in her expression. Instead of speaking, she leaned into me, her head finding that perfect spot against my shoulder. The morning quiet wrapped around us like a blanket, broken only by birdsong from the garden and the occasional clink of coffee mugs being lifted and replaced. We didn't discuss what would happen next, no talk of schedules or consequences or how we'd handle seeing each other at future family gatherings. Those conversations would come later, but for now, we simply existed in this transformed space where everything felt both completely changed and absolutely right. The sun climbed higher, casting patterns through the curtains onto rumpled sheets. Grace's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining without conscious thought. Together, we watched the garden come alive with morning light, the fixed gate marking the boundary between what was and what had become. If this kept you company, tap subscribe and leave one line that resonated. I read them all, and your words shaped the next story.